Thanks for tuning into the Sheet Metal Shaping Podcast, where we discuss the pursuit of sheet metal shaping education through traditional coach building techniques. My guest today on the show, all the way from Colorado, Mr. Craig the Welder on Instagram. My man, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm so excited to have you on, Craig. This is fun. I've been following your stuff now for a while, like 6 months, a year, maybe, probably a year better. And I mean,
appreciate it.
Yeah, your Instagram is it's blowing up. It's doing amazing.
Yeah, in the past year or so, it's really kind of took off. I was kind of just doing my thing, and then all of a sudden one day, one post I think of that car I'm building, it just kind of took off, and it's been an interesting ride so far. I'm not a super tech savvy individual, so it's all kind of new to me. I was like way behind on the times with even Instagram and stuff, so it's kind of like interesting to see people so interested in what was going on.
For sure. Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So I want to talk a little bit about you, what you got going on in the shop, how this all came to be, and then of course this handcrafted car that you're sculpting, which is absolutely gorgeous. The buck is gorgeous. The lines of the car are just spectacular. So that's what I'd like to touch on. So tell the folks a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start, to be honest.
How did you get started in this? Like, how did this all come to be?
It was kind of something I always wanted to do since like high school, and watching all like those guys on TV and stuff kind of got me really into cars and all that stuff. And then I graduated from high school. I grew up in Kentucky, graduated from high school back there in Kentucky, and then went to Wyotech in Pennsylvania for about a year and a half, 2 years, whatever that time frame was. Got out of that, moved back to Kentucky, and was working at a restoration shop back there, and then kind of just kept going from there, and eventually moved to Colorado and worked at a couple different shops here, and finally bit the bullet and just was like, all right, we're taking the plunge. We're going to see what we can do on our own. And so far, so good.
Very cool. Where did you say you grew up?
Kentucky.
Kentucky. So moving to Colorado, that's a jump.
Yeah, I always wanted to leave Kentucky, and but luckily I was like in the Cincinnati metro area, so I wasn't too far from stuff. I wasn't all the way out in the middle of nowhere. I was kind of still localized to everything, and there are a lot of good shops and some pretty good shapers and stuff around back then too, so it was kind of a nice little place to be.
Did you have some mentors growing up and coming into this trade that helped sculpt the way that you see things today?
Like after I started in the trade is when I really started like kind of meeting people, and I did some sessions with like Faye Butler and learned a lot from him. Then there's a guy, Terry Stiegel from Tennessee, I believe, who used to come up to the shop I was at in Kentucky and helped out on like big projects that we needed some extra hands on. He'd come up and do a bunch of fab work and teach us a bunch of stuff there too. So it was nice.
Very cool. Similar styles between those two guys or different styles?
Pretty similar, I think. That's a good question. It's been so long since I hung out with Terry Stiegel. Like I can't be, don't quote me on this, but I think he might have been the first guy to use like a thumbnail shrinking die in a pullmax.
Really?
Yeah, like they always had them for the power hammers and stuff, but I think he might have been the first one to adapt it to a pullmax.
Yep.
But I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. I don't really know. I think I heard that somewhere.
I don't know. We can't even fact check this on the air. I don't know.
Oh, there's no way to fact check it. I don't know. Maybe later. I don't know. I don't even know how to even go about looking it up. I don't know if he even is on the internet or anything like that, or what he's doing with his time anymore.
How did you bump into him?
So that was Terry Stiegel. That was he would come up and help us out at the shop I was working at Kentucky. Like if we had big fab projects, I was just fresh out of school and still learning a bunch, and he would come up and we had to really dive into some stuff, and he'd spend a week or two with us and really help us out.
Nice. And what about Faye? How did you bump into him?
How did that happen? I think the shop owner I was working for, he had met Faye years ago, and then decided Faye was having a seminar at a shop in Dayton, Ohio at Doug Times Welding Shop. Doug had built himself a power hammer. Yep. And so Faye was coming out to check it out because he had taught Doug years ago. So he was coming out there and decided to have a little seminar there. So there's a small group of guys that kind of went up and started using the power hammer and letting Faye teach us everything he knows, because he has a wealth of information.
For sure. It's interesting. You know what? I love the pass down to generations. One person learns something, they tweak it, they pass it down to the next. It's the fundamental basis for apprenticeship, right? Effectively, I mean, between Wyotech and learning from these two guys, that's pretty much what you got.
Yeah, and then luckily I was able to just like find good shops that were well equipped with the machinery that I've actually had some little bit of time on to actually help continue the craft and kind of figure the rest out on my own from the little bit I did, weekends here and there, a little bit of stints with other guys. Then I was able to actually take that little bit and spend the time on my own, really figuring it out and making it work for myself.
For sure. It sounds like you're more of a hammer guy than a wheel guy. Would that be fair?
I am. Yeah. I do not have an Englishwheel.
Uh-huh.
I keep thinking about getting one if I can find one for the right price, but yeah, I don't know. I've got my big power hammer and I've got, I guess, 3 planishing hammers, which is a little aggressive. I don't know that I need 3.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
Nice. So when you were going through this process and you're saying to yourself, okay, I want to learn the craft. Did you say, I specifically want to be a power hammer guy, or naturally that just kind of gravitated towards you?
Just kind of gravitated that way. The first shop I was at, we didn't have a power hammer. We had a pullmax and an Englishwheel.
Mm-hmm.
And a planishing hammer and stuff. And so we had like the smaller things, not the big power hammer. But then after meeting Faye and actually getting my hands on like a full size power hammer, and it's like, once you do it, it's hard to go back.
What do you have now?
So now it is a replica of a Yoder K90.
Mm-hmm.
It was built by Renato Muscovich.
Mm-hmm.
He's in Canada. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm not really sure. I've talked to him a few times. He's helped me out with some stuff, getting it back up and running. But so he built a bunch of those back in the day, and I guess it was 2005 when he built mine. So it's cast arms, but a fabricated base.
Cool. Very cool. And if you could change anything, knowing what you know now about the setup that you have, would you change anything?
Get another power hammer.
So you don't swap out guys?
Yeah, pretty much. Not that it takes that long, but still be nice to have one kind of set up for shrinking and then have one just set up for whatever else I need it for.
It's kind of true, eh? The thumbnail dies just sit in there forever. And then if you have a second one, you just, pick your radius and carry on. But the thumbnail dies just never leave. Yeah.
And I was lucky enough, the last shop I worked at out here, he had 2 double-sided power hammers.
Nice.
So one was just thumbnail and linear stretching die all the time, and the other hammer had all the radius dies and everything else. So that was great. If I could have something like that, that'd be amazing. But to have the space, those take up a lot of space.
Oh, they're like a car. It's like you need a whole bay just for the thing so you can swing a panel around, right?
Yeah, just be able to move around it and have it sitting somewhere. It definitely takes up a lot of space.
When did you make the jump from working in other people's shops to your own?
So I started my shop, that was 2018. Yeah, I was working at a shop, commuting 40 miles a day each way. So then and out here, traffic's been getting crazy over the past 10 years since I've lived here. And my commute was an hour and a half, 2 hours almost each direction. Finally, I was like, I've had enough. I always wanted to start a shop. I think this time, and was able to find some good equipment and kind of found a space and kind of dove right in, put everything I had into it and just dove in to see what we could do.
Very nice. Very nice. So like comparison being self-employed now to being employed. I mean, you've been doing this for a while. What are the benefits of being self-employed versus what are the benefits of having a 9 to 5?
I guess it all depends on where you work. I was lucky enough to work somewhere where I had tons of freedom, so I could still do whatever I want. And now I'm getting to a point where I can have a little bit more freedom. But like the first few years of my own shop, I mean, I was in there 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. So in the beginning, it was zero freedom. So it's kind of nice working for somebody else and you have a bunch of freedom. But now I'm getting to a point where I'm having my own freedom. It's going to be, so it's nice. Been a struggle for a few years, but we're getting everything starting to come together. And
sure. It's like pedaling a bike, right? Once you get up to speed, it's a little easier. Yeah,
especially you dive in head first. It's super stressful at first, and then kind of starts to mellow out a little bit. And it's good.
Because I mean, also too, you're acquiring equipment, you're setting up the shop, you're setting all the back end of an actual business, and bookkeeping and whatever. Are you setting all that stuff up? I mean, it's a lot more than just banging on metal. It's the business end too, right? It's both.
Oh, and all the hours a day I was at the shop wasn't always just actually working on cars or building stuff. It was continuing to set up stuff or making tooling for everything I have, or then trying to figure out whatever else and trying to get my name out more. And there's a lot of hours spent not actually producing anything in the shop,
right?
But actually getting everything else working so that I could produce stuff more effectively and not be just running around circles all the time.
So how do you balance like business brain versus production brain? How do you do that?
See, that's a good question because I don't really know.
You just do and hope it works out.
Kinda, honestly, as terrible as that sounds, it's kind of like I'm passionate about what I do, so kind of put my heart and soul into it. And I feel like that shows in the end results and when dealing with customers, and that kind of is, makes for better relationships and kind of helps out in the business side of things, because I don't know that I'm super business savvy or, like I said, tech savvy person earlier.
Right.
So I have not really much of either of those. It helps. I think it helps to be doing something that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
You know, if it was something I didn't.
Metal shaping would be your passion for sure.
Yeah. And if it would be, if I was doing something that I wasn't passionate about, I don't know how well it would be going right now. You know, might be a different story, because I would be less motivated to be in there and do the grind and get everything going. Because when you go and you actually enjoy what you're doing from a day to day, it makes it a little bit easier to spend those 12, 14-hour days.
Yeah, no doubt. What are you working on now? What's in the shop?
Let's see. So I've got what year is that? A 51 or 52 Jaguar XK120 that I've been working on for a bit, and then a 72, I think, maybe 73 De Tomaso Pantera. That has been a nightmare of a car. Those things rust like crazy. Then there's a 65 Impala that's just been kind of floating around. And then there's a new car that I'm in the midst of figuring out what we're doing with it. And I don't know what the customer wants, if I'm supposed to talk about. I'd probably talk about, I don't know if he wants to be showing a bunch of pictures and stuff yet, but so that's a 70, man, the years are always hard for me to remember now. 72 or 73 Maserati Ghibli SS Spider.
Nice.
That just showed up, and we're going back and forth with what we're going to do with it, and if we can meet the time frames that he wants versus what it might actually need, because it's kind of a basket case as well.
Sure. They all start like that, don't they? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This is more than I thought.
Yeah. And every time a car shows up, I'm like, oh man, why do I get all the bad cars? I'm like, also, if it was a nice car, it wouldn't need me to make a bunch of parts, right? Yeah. I'm like, oh wait, I kind of did this to myself. If I wanted nice cars all the time, I should be doing something different. But.
True. Very, very true. So that one that you're hand forming, building from nothing.
I forgot about that one.
Does that have a name? Does that have a project name? Like, what do you call it?
It's nothing really, to be honest. It's kind of just an idea to start with, and just kind of start going with it. And it's been working on it for a while now. It's definitely a long-term project that's kind of floating around in the background. I don't get to work on it all the time.
When that got started, I mean, first of all, is it your car or a customer car?
So that is my car.
Cool.
Yeah. For some reason was like, oh, I have free time. Let's build a car from scratch while dealing with 5 or 6 other customer projects. So I was like, this will work. Yeah.
How did that come to be? Where did this begin?
I've always wanted to build a car from scratch. And then first I kind of wanted to do like a 30 style car, and then going back and forth with how I would do it versus what I wanted, and just kind of, it seemed kind of difficult, and to get everything how I would have wanted and envisioned it was parts that were just out of the budget. That I was like, all right, that's not going to happen. Yeah. And then I think randomly a woman online sent me an email and had these blueprints of these old Alfa Romeos. I was like, oh, this is cool. Yeah. I was just kind of looking at them and kind of studying stuff and figuring things out, and was talking to some other guy that I knew in town that I met through a customer. And he was talking about building cars off of like a Miata platform. Yep. And so I was looking at one of these blueprints. I'm like, wait a second. These are very close in wheelbase. Like within, I think, I don't even remember what it was. I think the car I started off with was a little bit smaller than a Mazda Miata. Yep. Which is crazy. Yeah. And then so I was like, all right, we'll figure that part out later. So I was like, all right, this seems like an easier option than starting off on like a 30s car, because to get a correct engine for a 30s car, if it was like going to be a V12 or something, would have been insane. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, this could work. So I saw that and then started looking into it and was like, all right, Miatas aren't wildly expensive. You know, I could buy a Miata and at least use all the suspension and all that stuff, because they did all the hard work in designing it. Yeah. I can just make a tube chassis that most of that stuff is going to bolt to. Yep. And then just kept looking at its body. I was like, it's a beautiful car. So I started kind of messing with that and designed it based off of this early Alfa Romeo, mid-60s Alfa Romeo TZ2 race car. It was the basic design came from, and I just kind of been modifying bits and pieces as I was going along and kind of making it my own.
Man, it's a gorgeous shape. I mean, that Coke bottle profile down the side from the lines. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that. That's mostly that I know Zagato built the first one. I don't know who actually ended up designing it, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's a pretty classic, also just classic Italian design, almost like a Ferrari 250, but like scaled down a little bit, and it just has like those great curves. And I was like, all right, we're gonna take a lot of the profiles of this and then change some parts of it that I don't like, and just kind of fudge around and kind of make it my own instead of trying to do just a full replica.
Right. Right. So when you're doing that, like in terms of design, you've got a wood buck underneath it. Did you do the buck first? Did you do the design first? Like how did your process look?
So it started off as actually a 3D model of a TZ2. And then had somebody help me out because I'm not super great at CAD. So I had somebody else help me out in designing a buck, and we had to scale it up about 10%. I think it was actually 7% to fit like a wheelbase of an early Miata. So I was like, all right, we'll scale that up, change a few little details here and there, and just kind of change little bits, nothing too crazy. So it's still very Alfa Romeo, but it's got the differences that in the end it's going to be, took some cues off of Ferraris and stuff that'll be not super noticeable, but if it was ever to come across another natural TZ2, you'll know it's not the same thing.
Right, right. How many TZ2s are actually out there? Do you know?
Like 10 or 12. I think they may have made 12, and they were all fiberglass.
Yeah.
The original one that I think Zagato built, they built an aluminum one and used that as a plug to make all the mold. And then all of the original ones were race cars. They were race cars. They were all fiberglass for just weight savings.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. I mean, hey, you can't go wrong with Italian styling, starting as a base platform and then using something modern like a Miata, as you mentioned, and just boom, put the two together.
Yeah. I haven't decided what I'm going to do for the drivetrain yet. Kind of want something a little bit more unique than just like a Mazda 4-cylinder, but
two Mazda 4-cylinders.
I don't know where I'm going to put the second one. This car is tiny. It looks big in photos and on the buck and stuff, but in real life, it is a small little car.
Yeah. So. Oh man, your photos are spectacular. Like what you've been posting in your videos and all that. I don't know what filters you use on Instagram or how you post stuff, but like it turned out, and it turns out every time you post it, they're captivating.
Yeah, I actually have not used it. I don't think I've ever used a single filter on any of it. I just kind of throwing it out there, and this is what's going on. And so
when you made the buck, how did you build the buck? Let's talk about that.
So I had a guy help me design it in CAD off of 3D model. Then I built a CNC router from some plans online that I forget what the name of the company was that had them. So it'll fit a 4x8 sheet, but it actually hangs vertical. And then you have the router that's on like a sled, and it's controlled by chains. So then somebody designed the buck for me, or designed one half of it. So I was just double it and just flip it around. So then I just, for like 2 weeks straight, that little router was just cutting out stuff, cutting out MDF in the background, just making a mess and everywhere. But
oh man, it would have been dust for days.
Yeah, I had it hooked up to my shop vac, hoping for the best, but it was still every day. It's like, all right, we still got to blow everything out. But
it's funny.
At least then I was able to do work in the background and actually work on stuff instead of just standing there staring at cutting or spending my time with a jigsaw, just cutting everything out, because that takes forever.
It's going to be perfect too. When it comes off the rotor, it's perfect.
Yeah. A little bit of cleanup here and there, but like compared to what I can do with a jigsaw and then have to sand it for however long, like, the time saved in that compared to trying to make a buck by hand is unbelievable.
Yeah. Do you prefer a wood buck over something else?
I do. Yeah. Actually, I do prefer a wood buck. I mean, I've tried some wire bucks and everything like that, wire forms. They just aren't very rigid. So when you start fitting your panels to it, the buck can move.
Yeah.
So then like you don't know if the part's exact, which is fine depending on what you're doing. They serve their own purposes, but if you're using a bunch of clamps, sometimes you'll clamp it in one spot, it'll move.
Pull it,
It'll pull the wire instead of actually pulling the panel in. So like I prefer the rigidity of a wood buck that like doesn't move and just is there.
Clamp your panel to it. Perfect fit every time. Because the buck moves.
Nothing's moving. You're good to go. So it kind of makes it a little bit more repeatable.
Yeah.
Might be a little bit more labor intensive to build, but I think for me, I like the repeatability of even if it's a one-off part. I hate going back and forth to something and it's different every time you go back. It's like, what just happened? Something that in my brain just gets me so frustrated. I'm just like, no, can't do this. Get something that's not moving, and then we'll just go from there.
So a lot of people talk about a wood buck or egg crate buck, whatever people like to call it, and they say, I don't like the use of these wood bucks because I can't see behind it and I can't clamp to it. How do you overcome some of these challenges?
That's fair. Like the clamping thing was always an issue in the past stuff, but then now what I started doing is you start shaping the panel and then you get it pretty close, and we're fitting in a couple spots that you like, and then you can add brackets to the wood.
Yeah.
That's what I do is I add a piece of little like 90-degree L bracket, and then I can drill a cleco to that. I'll screw that to the wood and run a cleco through the panel. So then I'm always setting it back in the same spot with 1 or 2 clecos. And then I know I'm not shifting it half an inch here, half an inch there. Every time I go back, I can put it in the same spot. And then I know what little bits need to be tweaked here and there and that type of stuff. Because definitely getting clamps onto some of those bucks is difficult.
Yeah.
If you don't design it with like cutouts.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times you'll have cutouts where the buck's only, you have the whole basic profile, but it's only an inch or 2 wide. So then you can grab it with a big C-clamp or something.
Do you ever have to fill it in with foam to get a little bit more information, or can you kind of eyeball it now just because you have these skills?
I haven't used foam. I did use something when I was doing the quarter panels on my car. I just took a bunch of welding rod, some thin welding wire, and took it because there's a weird reverse curve down on the bottom of the quarter panels. It's almost like a mud flap looking type of thing. And I was like, this is just weird. It's fighting me. So I grabbed a bunch of welding rod and just started taping it to the buck, and that helps kind of show all the intricate curves that were going on. And then I was like, all right, this makes more sense. Yeah. And then I could pull a little bit more accurate of a paper pattern off of that.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, sometimes those reverse curves, you look at it and you're like, from one angle, it looks different. The other angle, it looks different. And then it just gets to you. And you're like, how do I see this differently? You know?
Yeah. Sometimes you just need to step back and figure something out. But the foam's a good idea. I haven't tried it with like spray foam or something like that. I've built some parts of bucks out of just like the pink insulation type foam. That super dense stuff you can get from the hardware store. And that's been nice. And it definitely does the job. So it's a useful way to do it as well.
I just had a guy on the podcast recently. His Instagram is "How is that street legal?" And he formed a Ferrari, like a really beautiful Ferrari shark nose, and he did the whole thing out of foam, right? And in doing that, he did it with like a hot wire, and then he did it with sanding and all stuff. And he was like, the foam bits, it was just a snowstorm in the shop. Just foam.
Oh, I can only imagine. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. He's like, you move a tool off the bench and there's foam under it. He's like a year or 2 or 3, I forget how many years later, he's like, I am still finding foam in toolboxes and cans. Oh my gosh. It's endless. Right?
Yeah. I could only imagine. Yeah. That's another thing. Like it just makes such a mess doing some of that stuff. And I mean, it definitely helps in the long run when you're doing things, but sometimes it's such a mess. It's just like, oh man, I really want to deal with all that. And like, that's where there's like kind of taping some welding wire onto the buck. It makes it a little bit easier where you get to see what's going on.
For sure.
It's a little bit cleaner, and then you just kind of peel it back off and you still get to use the welding wire in the end.
That's right. Where are you at with the build right now? Where does this stand in terms of progress?
Oh, we are a long ways out. So far, I guess I've got the hood all welded together. And then today I was working on the cowl. That's ready to weld. And then, but I still have to get all the quarters welded together and all that stuff, and the rear end all finished up and welded on. And then still got to build inner structure for the doors. The inner structure, that's going to be a big nightmare as well, because that's kind of one of the most tedious things, is getting everything to fit and work.
Sure. Yeah.
I could just weld the door solid, Dukes of Hazzard it, but
that's right.
That's not going to work. I can't do that. I'm 6'5". I got to be able to climb in and out of a door. I can't climb all the time.
Because you're tall, let's talk about that. So did you have to make any modifications to the interior based on where you think your seat position might be, knowing that it's kind of a Miata platform-ish?
That is the mystery that still lies in it, that I'm going to have to figure out once I start doing the chassis.
Yeah.
So I'm doing a full tube chassis, but then it'll just like it'll bolt in some of the Miata suspension parts here and there, like the rear end and the front suspension, steering, and all that stuff will bolt to just like a chromoly tube chassis.
Yeah.
So luckily I'll get to move some stuff, but I'm kind of afraid I'm not going to fit in this car when it's all said and done. Come on.
We see a stretch coming in the near future. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the overall height when it'll be at ride height, I think it'll be 40 inches tall.
Okay.
And so interior wise, if I say a 4-inch ride height, that'll be to the bottom of the chassis. So minus an inch and a quarter or so for the tubing. Mm-hmm. So what's that? 30, just under 35 inches from
Yeah.
seat mount to roof skin. I'm like, I don't
Have you
know.
measured yourself from like hips up just to make
No,
sure?
I'm afraid to do it.
Funny, most people are chopping roofs down, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, I got to send this one up.
Oh, I love I love chop tops as well, but I'm also like, I got to think about myself. I'm like, I
For
can't
sure.
just drive like this all the time. And
Yeah.
I figured last thing to go on is going to be the roof skin to weld onto the whole chassis and all that stuff. So once it's all made, if I don't have enough room, I can always add some like bubbles on the roof.
Yeah.
Kind of like those Zagato style bubbles that they would have done. So that'll give
Speed
me
bubble.
another inch or two. The one on each side, give me another inch or two of headroom. So that'd be,
That's funny.
if I need it, that's kind of where my head's at.
That's funny. Do you have an hour's expectation for this build? Like, where do you think it's going to fall?
Ooh, I wish I was better at actually keeping track of the hours I have into it so far.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I had to guess, I think a body with kind of functioning parts, doors, and like interior, in like the actual door frames itself, and shut faces and stuff here and there, probably be around 2,000 hours.
Floor system as well, or no?
The floor system is going to be pretty bare bones and kind of race car. So it's going to be the tube chassis, and then basically you're going to just do a flat belly pan underneath, and you'll climb in and basically just step onto the tube chassis, and it'll have like a spot for your feet and the seats, and that's about it. And you'll just see the tube chassis and the flat underbelly, and that's about all that's going in the interior.
Raw like a race car. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a race car. Hopefully it'll be street legal. We'll see.
Yeah.
But, I feel like I've got a while till I get to that point.
Can you title these things in Colorado fairly easily, or how does that go?
That I'm not 100% sure about. But I think with the idea, that was part of the idea why I wanted to go with the Miata. So if I can buy a Miata, maybe I can fudge around a little bit and use the VIN off of Miata and do that stuff. I know some places said that's easier. They might put up a fight against it. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But that's at least worth a shot.
Sure. Material choice. What are you using for materials?
For the body of the car is all 3003 aluminum.
Yep. And thickness?
063.
Nice. How do you feel about working with 063 versus something thinner, and why did you choose that material?
Chose that material because it's got a decent rigidity to it. It's kind of dent resistant. Then if you anneal it, it's super soft and easily workable. Whereas like 1000 series aluminum, like they would have used back in the day on some of these old Italian cars, is so soft, and like you lean against it, and all of a sudden there's a dent, and it's just like, so I wanted a little bit more resistance to denting.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go all the way to 5000 series because that just adds a little bit of more difficulty to work with without annealing it. So some of the panels on the car I annealed before I made them. A lot of them I just kind of hammered out and didn't even have to anneal it. So that's where I kind of like 3003. It's at kind of a sweet spot between the two.
And you did a really cool thing with the Headlight Bucket too. I think this was a recent post. You had made a tool. It was a crimping tool of some kind to put a flange in.
Yeah, just like
what was that?
Little flanging tool. Like I've seen some companies sell them basically based off like a vice grip or a locking plier, and it just has a little step on it. I machined some the correct amount of step I wanted, the height that I wanted on the mill, and then butchered up an old pair of vice grips and TIG welded them in place and went to town and
butchered up a pair. It was a pretty cool tool.
Yeah, and it worked pretty good. I can't complain. A lot of times I would have done all that in my pullmax and then assembled it, but I know that kind of curve going around the whole headlight opening to get each weld seam to match up perfectly and not be something to fight with at some point. I was like, I'll weld it together and then I'll make these. Hopefully they work. If not, we'll figure something else out,
Yeah. Isn't that amazing though? Like you're basically in a lot of ways trying to, create tools as you go because of the circumstances as they fall, right? Like sometimes people don't have a pullmax and all you have is a pair of vice grips, and you have both and you still went with the vice grip method. The biggest tool doesn't always win out.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the fun part about it, is kind of the problem solving and being able to make your own toolings goes so far in this industry, where like just having whatever you can buy off the shelf limits you so much in certain ways. You still make a lot of cool stuff, don't get me wrong, but if you're limited to just like what you can buy off the shelf, it ends up you get whatever size beads you can buy, whatever this and that. Where if you can have even just a small machine shop, or you don't even need a machine shop, just even making stuff off of a bandsaw and a file, you can make a lot of tooling for stuff and make more unique unique designs and everything.
I remember when I first got started doing anything mechanical related, I was probably like 12 years old. I had this little cheapy drill press and a grinder. And it's amazing what you can chuck up in like $100 drill press with a grinder and create shapes and all this stuff. And you can make all kinds of different profiles that, you know, if you don't have expensive tooling or if you don't have a lathe or you don't have a mill, like you can still get the job done. It just takes a little longer.
Yeah, there's definitely ways around it. Like I've definitely done it both ways. And like now I have a lathe and a mill and all that stuff. So it makes it a little bit easier, but in the end, I still find myself hand filing each piece to match perfectly, where it's close on the mill and all that stuff, but you know,
yeah,
it's not a CNC mill. I'm not designing a bunch of stuff and having it all CNC'd out and whatever. So I'm like, all right, it's super close, or I'll use the mill to rough everything out, at least give me some nice flat spots, and then I can do the rest by hand and tweak it to get it to fit as you run panels through it and find the little flaws here and there and make it work how you want it to.
Do you ever go bead roller, or are you primarily pullmax only?
I don't have a bead roller either.
Yeah.
No bead roller, no Englishwheel.
Yeah. You're like anything that rolls, you're like, I'm out.
If it doesn't make noise, what's the point? You know? Yeah. I know my neighbors hate me at the shop, but you know, it's kind of nice. It's fun to make noise and kind of just beat some stuff up every now and then.
Is it a commercial location, or do you have a shop at home?
It's a commercial location. Yeah. So it's about 15 minutes, depending on traffic, away from my house. So.
And what type
not a bad commute.
What type of neighbors do you have that'll even remotely put up with a sledgehammer making panels all day?
Luckily, the one shop next door, they're never really there. They have a bunch of trucks that they just park in. They leave every morning. They're gone.
Yeah.
The other guy on the other side of me, he does camper van conversions.
Yep.
So he's just making his own noise doing stuff. So he might not even notice.
Yeah, that's cool. Does he ever come over and say, hey, I want you to build me like a replica Airstream or something like that? That would be really cool.
Not yet, no. He does a lot of stuff where it's like modern Ford Transit vans.
Okay.
And he just outfits, he has an interior already designed up and you can pick what you want. And then he just builds it and puts it in and sends you on your way again.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. As we wind this down, where can people, if somebody wanted to build a car like this for themselves, like the one that you're creating, how would you recommend they start, knowing what you know now about the process?
I mean, I would think it's very beneficial to learn the basics with hand tools. Because if you don't know the basics with hand tools and you just jump into a big machine, you're just going to make a bunch of scrap metal for a while because you're still not understanding what it's doing and how it's doing it. So I try to tell people, you know what, if you can, just go get a stump and a mallet, and even if it's a cheap Englishwheel or a cheap planishing hammer, one or the other, like those two you can at least start making stuff and then progress into whatever tooling you think you want after that to help you speed things up and maybe up the quality a certain level and just kind of dive into it. To be honest, it's got to be ready to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people are afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you don't make a mistake, you don't learn sometimes, right?
Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest part of the learning process is, you know, you got to mess some stuff up and that'll teach you. I feel like I've learned a lot more from ruining things than I have from getting it right the first time.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, at least I know not to do that anymore. It's like, all right, now I can make it much faster by avoiding that option.
For sure. Man, this has been so much fun to hear about your build, to hear about what you got going on in the shop, to hear that you made a jump from, you know, going to school to working from other people or working for other people. And then, you know, doing it yourself as a business owner operator is amazing. And I'm really happy to have you on the show. So from me to you, from this side of the border to yours, thanks for being here. Where can people find out more about you and Kennedy Coachworks?
Basically it'll be mostly my Instagram, and then I'm going to have a TikTok. That's unimportant. I feel like, I don't know, but it's same name. It's all Craig_the_welder. And then there's links to my website on that, and thinking about diving into other stuff and maybe starting YouTube here one of these days. But like I said, I got to get a little bit more tech savvy before I do that. I got to at least learn how to edit a video a little bit better before I have 8 hours of video, nothing to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. So. For sure. Cool, man. Well, thanks for tuning into the Sheet Metal Shaping Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe. And if you like this episode, tell a friend, and we will see you on the next show.